Sherlock Holmes and the Secret Weapon is a 1942 movie starring Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce. The actors played the famous duo of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson in no less than 14 films together. They are widely regarded to have provided the greatest ever representation of Arthur Conan Doyle's creations. Nigel Bruce's bumbling but affable Watson sets a perfect contrast to Basil Rathbone's intensely focused Holmes. The first two of this series of Sherlock Holmes movies were released by 20th Century Fox in 1939 and were set in the original Victorian surroundings. But these two movies were somewhat lumbering efforts to my mind, appearing weighed down by reverence for the original source material. That said, the supreme chemistry between Bruce and Rathbone already shone through. Universal Studios evidently must have realised that the two of them had great potential, and went on to produce 12 more films with them, the first in 1942. These films by Universal were quite different, as, for one, they were set in contemporary times, and Sherlock Holmes' main aim was to foil the Nazis. Also, these new films now merely took slight inspiration from the tales of Sherlock Holmes, no longer seeking to recreate original storylines. Being able to use contemporary set and costume obviously made for much lower production costs, and allowed Universal to churn out fairly easy propaganda fodder during the war years. But no longer being bound by the strictures of Victorian surroundings and close adherence to Arthur Conan Doyle's novels, the makers must have felt much more liberated, for it shows in the results. None of these films on their own would really represent anything outstanding, but it is the presence of Bruce and Rathbone which elevate them to something very special. The film I have selected here is clearly one of the best. Dr. Franz Tobel, played by William Post Jr., is a brilliant scientist in Switzerland who has invented a new bomb sight, allowing for precision bombing. The Nazis are about to kidnap him and take him to Germany, when Sherlock Holmes manages to steal him away from under their noses and whisks him off to Britain. Tobel, though, is a very independent-minded gentleman. He is intent on producing the bomb sight himself, so as not to allow some of the mechanism's secrets to fall into anyone else's hands. The 4 parts can be made independently from each other, without those making each part needing to know how they work in unison. Thus, Dr. Tobel hands over each part to a different trusted fellow scientist in London for them to replicate. Naturally, it isn't long before Dr. Tobel vanishes. Henchmen for the Nazis have found him and dragged him off to some secret hideaway. A man to consider all eventualities, Tobel left a note for Sherlock Holmes in the case that he should be abducted. But the dastardly villains have already obtained that note by theft. In the envelope is to be found not Dr. Tobel's secret message, but a note left by no lesser than Sherlock Holmes' arch-enemy, Professor Moriarty. Now aware that his nemesis is involved in this plot, Holmes, using one of his ingenious disguises, ventures into the more lawless end of town in search of information. There he briefly falls prisoner to Moriarty, played by Lionel Atwill, but escapes. It is of the utmost importance now to find the parts of Tobel's bomb sight, and to find Dr. Tobel himself. Holmes brilliantly manages to reproduce the coded message from the imprint left on the next sheet of paper on the notepad which Dr. Tobel used to write his message. The first lines, which contain the first 3 names, Holmes can decode, but the 4th line seems to operate by a different code. When they reach the first 3 scientists to whom Tobel sent his bomb sight parts, it is already too late. Moriarty's goons got there first. The villainous professor, possessing an equally remarkable intellect, was well capable of breaking the code of the first 3 lines. At a distinct disadvantage, Holmes now needs to get to the 4th man before Moriarty can either crack the code of the 4th line or can torture the information out of Dr. Tobel. Else all is lost and the Nazis will have secured possession of this secret weapon. More so, Moriarty will have triumphed. The intensity of Basil Rathbone as Holmes in this race to the finish with Moriarty is perfect. To all intents and purposes, Basil Rathbone is Sherlock Holmes. Incisive, decisive, functioning on an altogether different plane to everyone else around him.
Studio Holmes?
It's all there for the trained eye to read, Watson.
But look here, why couldn't he have been attacked on his way to the woman's apartment?
The mark of a blow has erased some of the powder. Obviously, if the attack came first, the powder would have remained undisturbed.
And the full lips? That was a guess.
I never guess, Watson. You have rubbed the lipstick from your face with the handkerchief you now hold in your hand. And that amount of lipstick never came from a pair of thin lips.
And the blonde hair? Good gracious me.
The encounters of Moriarty and Holmes are particular highlights in this movie, both knowing themselves superior intellects and enjoying the challenge the other man represents. Lionel Atwill here makes for a very good Bond villain, long before Bond villains were ever invented. This was also the first of the 6 movies in the series which featured Dennis Hoey as the somewhat useless Inspector Lestrade. Meanwhile, have a look out for Mary Gordon, who played the housekeeper of 221B Baker Street for every single one of the 14 movies. So if you enjoy your Sherlock Holmes movies, then I strongly advise you witness for yourself what is widely accepted to have been the greatest outing of Watson and Holmes in film history. Sherlock Holmes and the Secret Weapon may be just the movie to introduce you to this formidable duo. And being at the height of the Second World War, and this clearly being a propaganda movie, what better way for Watson and Holmes to finish than with a little quotation from Shakespeare? Over to you, Messrs. Watson and Holmes.
Things are looking up, Holmes. This little island's still on the map.
Yes. This fortress, built by nature for herself. This blessed plot. This earth, this realm. This England.
That's all for now from the projection booth atop the Cyber Pass. Thank you very much, and goodbye.